Welcome to Growth Solutions. Our guest today is Wayne O'Neill. Wayne is CEO and lead business coach to your corporation, and we're going to talk to Wayne about what he does. It's really fascinating. It's a different approach to really working with firms at a very high level. So let's just jump right into this. How do you describe what you do? Do you have any kind of...
Yeah, we're kind of a unique combination. We do three things.
Mm-hmm.
We try to help firms, particularly professional service firms, in go-to-market efforts to shorten the cycle of the way that they contact and build accounts,
Mm-hmm.
but also to make those efforts effective. What starts to make us different is we also coach the leadership levels of some of those target clients, particularly on the institutional side, healthcare systems, higher education institutions, corporations, various levels of government. And we coach them on how do they find talent and service providers that really can make a bigger impact. It's not that I don't think procurement can work effectively, but I think sometimes procurement kind of doesn't spot some of the service providers that can make a greater impact.
Right.
The most interesting part of our practice is the fact that we're pretty creative, and I'll change that. We're very creative in trying to help owners with funding issues and funding challenges. So it all comes together if we show you how to connect with a client and an institution, and then we show you ways to leverage service providers that are hiding in plain sight, and then we find funding solutions to move that scope along. It creates a win-win-win environment, and that's really kind of the nexus of our practice. So we want everybody in that environment to win.
Right. So in talking to you a little bit before we started the show, I understand you're really getting into the DNA of an organization at
That's
a
correct.
very high level. I
That's
mean,
correct.
really thinking strategically, helping them think strategically about what they're doing, and helping them think through how to address the entire customer experience. Is that right?
That's correct. I mean, look, all institutions, whether they be profit or not for profit, struggle with five basic things.
Mm-hmm.
Some of them obvious, some of them not so obvious. They obviously, struggle with how to engage their customers. They obviously struggle sometimes with how to engage a changing employment force, particularly with the next generations, millennials and below. But what's not seen is how do they engage with stakeholders, and how do they engage and defend themselves against evolving competition. And then the thing that we probably pay attention to the least is even if they're a not-for-profit, they struggle with their business equation and their operating model. Not that they need to make money, but how do they remain effective?
Right, right. So you're really talking about business planning at this point.
Yes.
How is a company organized in order to best achieve the goal of creating a great customer experience?
So if we take a specific example, I'm terribly fond of higher education because
Mm-hmm.
it's something that looks like it's not changing dramatically, but actually it's really changing dramatically.
Mm-hmm.
You can't talk to somebody in higher education and just say, hey, we've got a new software package, or hey, we're the best architectural designer, or we're the best builder for higher education institutions, without understanding kind of the stress that higher education's going through.
Mm-hmm.
And this is happening throughout the whole organization. It's happening, trustees feel this. I mean, the average kid today is asking a different kind of question versus what they asked in my generation.
Mm-hmm.
My generation, we just said, we're going to college because that's the best way for us to have a great future. Kids today are saying they understand student debt. They not just want a job, they want career options, they want to be engaged with. They're asking something different.
Mm-hmm.
So that higher education experience has got to change dramatically.
Right.
So what do those leaders have to do to make that happen? They can't just build new buildings. They can't just pour more money at it. They got to look at this differently. So if you're going to provide a service or you're going to try to help those institutions, you can't just call on them.
Right.
You have to start with a different sort of mindset of how that's all going to happen.
Well, the academic institutions are really in the crosshairs because technology is changing everything,
Yes.
and every industry is having to
Right.
adapt.
Right.
But are training the next generation that's going to have to go into the workforce and
Right.
live in the world and adapt to it.
Right.
So that's a very challenging environment for them to deal with. Can we get a little more concrete and maybe just a simple example? We were talking about mobility as an
Yes.
issue, and I think that's a great example to illustrate what we're talking about with addressing how the organization is structured and how you need to really address that.
How are our organization structured?
Yeah, well-
I mean, look, we're big fans of mobility because some people would refer to it as parking, but look, the average college campus, here's what they're really dealing with. First of all, kids don't drive as much as, again, previous generations. They're not as attached to their cars, but there's still kind of a tremendous mobility challenge on all campuses. Everybody knows about the Uber and Lyft phenomenon, but there's a value to Uber and Lyft coming onto your campus. Most campuses just don't leverage that. There are scooters, there are weekend rentals of vehicles. But if you pull that all together in a mobility concession, that could be worth anywhere from $200 to $400 million to the average university and sometimes to an individual campus. Most of the time, leadership levels are not aware of that. They don't see the value of parking revenue. Here's an interesting factoid. Every time you pick up or drop off with Uber or Lyft, that can be a $2 to $3 charge per drop off. That revenue adds up, and that in a concession environment over a 20 or 30 year period of time is a pretty big paycheck. So again, we're solving that part of our practice. We're solving a bigger issue. But if you're going to go in there and say, we'll help you to bring, for example, another part of our practice, bring a cyber range and help you with cybersecurity training, which a facility like that could cost $40 to $50 million bucks. Well, we just found $300 to $400 million to pay for that and some other projects.
Right. So that's how it circles back into
That's how it circles back.
Yeah.
I'm not bringing money just for the money's sake. I'm bringing the money so that I can address the bigger business and political issues that institution is struggling with. And what I want is my clients, my service provider clients, to see that they need to be part of that discussion. The client talks differently when they're not in budget mode. Right. When they're in wish and vision mode, which is more strategic, everybody thinks together. It works backwards from, I'm a real fan because it goes back to my early career with Jim Collins and Good to Great. One of my business coaches from my early career, a woman by the name of Marlis Hanson, just always said you got to start with that DNA in order to kind of solve problems.
Right. So the consulting, a lot of the consulting I've been involved with, which was much smaller businesses, but it's for me, in my experience, that's the one thing I really try to focus on. The strategy isn't that complex and the budgets aren't that big and complex, but it still comes down to, okay, how can you think more innovatively about how you can satisfy and fulfill your customer, right?
Correct.
Create a better experience for them.
That's correct.
Are you even thinking that way?
Right.
So I like your approach. How hard is it for you to get them thinking innovatively and about the entire organization, and maybe even to the point where they're willing to entertain making structural changes and freeing up that money and creating whole new experiences?
When you say they, you mean the leadership level. Yeah, look, it's an emotional intelligence challenge. So you're not going to, we all hear what we want to hear, and so I'm not big on PowerPointing my way in there or just being persistent. I'm, part of our practice, and we talked about it before the show, is you got to go and not just build relationships with people. You got to go and hang out where they are talking about the deeper problems. For example, going back to the higher education example, you learn a lot when you go to a National Association of College and University Business Officers. Not just because they're talking about money, but because there's also trustees there, there are also chancellors there, and they're all talking about the shared challenges of how higher education is evolving. People listen to you and will engage with you when they catch you paying attention to them.
We're still here talking with Wayne O'Neill and his company Reset. We're exploring new, smarter ways of working with businesses to get them thinking out of the box, really, and thinking very strategically. You were tapping into their emotional intelligence, right, to really kind of explore the needs at a higher level. And what does that lead to from that point?
Well, look, let me give you a real concrete example. So besides finding funding in creative ways, so here's a topic that we try to help universities and even colleges with, cybersecurity training. So, the common thought is kind of, well, come up with some sort of entity where you train people and it's kind of one of those build it and they will come environment. I think that takes too long. I think you got a bigger problem. So just to throw a few stats around, there are a need of 3 to 5 million cybersecurity trained folks in the country right now. And so if I was talking to a trustee or if I was talking to a chancellor, I would say, look, it's not just engineering students that you can pull into this, it's kids that think differently. Hacker mentality is more about artists than it is just about technical training. So we came up with a concept, a subscriber kind of concept of how do you build a cyber range, either on campus or near a campus, leverage students from that campus, leverage even professors from that campus, but then bring in professional operators, preferably with NSA training, National Security Association training, and blend that all in together, and then engage companies that university is already connected with. Like University of Wyoming is very connected with Black Hills Energy. They're already very connected with Anadarko Energy. The energy business is very, very focused on cybersecurity. So is the power business. So is the banking business. So is the so is the insurance business. If you're the University of Nebraska, that's another client of ours, it was pretty easy to talk to those insurance companies and those banking clients to see if they could be subscribers for a cyber
So do they
range.
all interact in the same space?
And they all interact in the same space. So basically, it's not a data center. It's offline. We pull together what's known as a red team, which is again a combination of students, professors, and more professionally, typically military trained folks, and they all learn together. It's apprentice type thinking. But here's the payoff for everybody in that. The university gets a big boost because they're now delivering graduates that are specifically trained for an industry. Those kids can graduate and get $130,000 to $150,000 a year jobs, and they're in high demand. The companies that normally have kind of a foundation kind of connection to that university now are cross-leveraging that university in a very different way.
This is a whole new model of learning.
It's a whole new model of learning.
You're creating a space, a cyber range, with industry and education all plugged into it, creating an opportunity for everybody. Everybody to learn. Let
me make it bigger. So at the University of Wyoming, we took the mobility concept, which is a $200 or $300 million concept, that can lead to cyber ranges. One of those cyber ranges can be put in downtown Laramie, that can then create a mixed use environment because that'll create a lot of traffic. That then boosts the local economy. So you get a domino effect, and so now you see not only the corporations, the university, the students, the professors all winning, now you see the community winning. It's kind of the 4P environment, public, private, partnership. That's what we're really after. And that you can't just call on people and get in front of them to talk about that. They have to sense, do you understand the bigger issue? the value impact of cybersecurity training, finding creative funding values, bringing the community together, cross-leveraging all that. You want a bigger win. Yeah. And in that particular case, 4 or 5 of our clients won simultaneously.
Yeah.
And now they're all thinking, different kind of conversation.
Yeah, very different.
Very different. You're not in this, how do we close this? How do we get, how do we just get the contract signed? Once everybody sees the win-win-win-win in mentality taking over, it's not the normal arm wrestling.
Right.
I'm not telling you that lawyers go away,
right,
but it's a different discussion.
Right. The solution finds itself at that point.
That's right. And so part of our facilitation in Reset is I'm trying to change that mentality. Don't just call on people. Have them get a sense, just like they should get when they meet us. Do you really understand what we're wrestling with? Because I'm not going to just, I'm not going to just tell you that personally. I just really don't like the, tell me about your pain. Tell me what keeps you up at night.
Right.
I find most sophisticated leaders, they don't want to tell you that.
Right.
They want you to kind of like, do you already get this?
Yeah, right.
So
it's funny, when I was selling broadcast systems, I discovered pretty quickly that the clients were not thinking out of the box enough.
Right.
And they were thinking in an old-fashioned, well, let's just sell impressions and we'll be TV. And I'm going, well, you're not on television,
right.
You're online. And by the way, there's not one, but there's 3 or 4 or 5 revenue streams you can mix together.
Right.
So that led to that. That's kind of why I understood intuitively what you're talking about. So I get that, and that's, I just wish, there are opportunities to make that happen more often, but you've plugged right into it.
Yeah, I mean, look, we love technology. I can talk about drone technology too, but the cyber range is not just about cybersecurity. It's about the impact and helping clients to think differently. Because once that waterfall happens, if you see that the funding creativity then led to educational excellence, that led to community development, it's just difficult to beat that. The same thing here that's going on here in Houston. We're involved in Ellington Field, which is, I'm not knocking it as a spaceport, but what we think will happen faster is, look, I want everybody in the audience to pay attention to drones, but don't pay attention to what you see being bought out, as a hobbyist out of Best Buy. I want you to think of a drone as something that's the size of an Embraer aircraft, with a 130-foot wingspan. That's the technology that's being used in military theaters right now, and I think everyone would be shocked that from 20 to 25,000 feet, you can see whether it's a straight edge screw or it's a Phillips head screw. That's what's going on. So what are the implications for something like Ellington Field? If we make that a drone base of operations, like has happened in Grand Forks, North Dakota, that we were involved with, all of a sudden you can now cover the entire Gulf of Mexico with drones. Before every storm, like a Harvey, you can have our whole region, practically the whole Gulf Coast, surveyed before and after without putting, helicopter pilots in danger, pilots period in danger. It just changes the whole.
Getting the pilot out of the plane changes the dynamics to the point that they're really in a whole different business.
That's right.
And that's where you got to get them thinking, wait a minute.
And how does that tie back to our business? The drone business is not about aviation, it's about data. And so the terabytes of data that come off of those drones create a whole new opportunity. And so, I know our region is still stinging from losing Amazon, but but there's so much more technology opportunity in our region around the city of Houston. We see it as dramatic. And how does that affect, go back to what we just talked about in higher education? Where are some of the better places to leverage that talent? Rice University, San Jack Community College, Lone Star Community College, let alone Texas A&M, the behemoth in this area.
Well, the beautiful thing about that is 10 years ago, and 20 years ago, I saw college universities struggling with how do we train students at the time in software that they couldn't even get their hands on.
Right.
And now they're starting to find, okay, through the public-private partnerships,
Right.
we can build not the textbook, but we can build a fertile ground where people can actually learn, and then the learning is taking place not only in university, it's taking place in the industry even, which is fascinating. I mean, they're making it valuable again.
I mean, part of our practice, if you're going to go back to those 3 circles that I talked about before, this is not something where you sit in a classroom and learn. This is not like a bunch of acronyms and memorizing all this. This is real shoulder-to-shoulder activity. This is learning how to engage people differently from an emotional intelligence standpoint. Again, I don't want you to hear that I'm antisocial or I'm against relationship building, but relationship building only takes you so far. There's so much change that then creates fear with the people that really own the problem at senior levels. You have to engage them differently.
Right.
You have to talk to them at a totally different level and show them ideas, and then show them not just solutions, but funding sources that they didn't realize they're sitting on top of.
Right.
I mean,
It all sort of drives everything drives everything else.
That's correct.
All the pieces of a puzzle.
it's all cross-leveraged. I mean, we stumbled upon the fact that private equity sources, sovereign wealth funds, are searching for how do they invest in assets across the country. We didn't realize that they were a little bit clumsy in trying to find those opportunities. They didn't know how to find like a private Catholic university in Denver, Colorado that's trying to remake itself and become, put mixed use facilities on its campus to become more engaging. They don't know how to find those opportunities.
Because they were funding the companies that were going to go in leveraging relationship approach.
That's right. That's right. You know, and the same thing applies in other. It's not just, I'm using higher education because it's a simple metaphor.
Right.
But the same thing applies in airports. The same thing applies for healthcare. I mean, healthcare. You know, we were talking before we started today about the Texas Medical Center. It's a wonderful place to go. It's, you know, that's where I would want to be treated if anything serious happened to me. But it also has to be rebuilt and remade from a retailization standpoint,
Right.
from a convenience standpoint. How are you going to do that? You can't just ask everybody to write a check, you know, but what are they sitting on top of? Concession opportunities for mobility.
Right.
And so, again, it comes back to bringing those 3 circles together.
Right, that makes perfect sense. And the public-private partnerships obviously play a big role. You've got, you're bringing in, on the for-profit side, organizations that know how to make a profit.
Yes.
And that's, you know, because government's not really good at that. So you bring them to the table, and you find how the funding sources come together. You end up creating not a couple of partners, but like a whole school of partners.
Right. That's correct. And that's a good way to see it. If you go back to that win-win-win mentality of that's a different way to start a conversation. And you know, you pushed on this earlier. Are people comfortable with that typically? No, but you know, I find that if you stay with them and engage, and they catch you paying attention to the deeper issues that are going on in their world, you know. Once they sense that you see it, they engage you. And that's really a bigger, again, I'm not dismissing relationships, but that's a bigger way to have that conversation.
Right, because you're really you're on your own learning curve, understanding their situation, their challenges, and then helping them look at it in a different way.
Right, that's correct.
That's what it all comes down to. Well, I think we're about out of time here. I want to thank you for being with us today, and please come back. This has been great, been enlightening. I hope if you're in the audience, you got a few little insights into how dramatic technology is literally changing our world. It's changing it faster than you can imagine, and it's a topic we'll come back to again and again. Thank you, Wayne.
Thanks, Bruce.